Welcome to Unadulterated Adultery Confessions channel that we hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Never meant for it to happen, or maybe I did. It's hard to tell the difference when you've been pushed, when the world tilts and suddenly, what once seemed unthinkable becomes inevitable. It wasn't about love, it wasn't even about revenge, not at first. It was about something deeper, something raw, desire, power, the thrill of knowing I still had it. And if my husband, with his callous words and wandering eyes, couldn't see that, then someone else would, and someone else did. Our new driver. It started with a look, a knowing glance in the mirror, a lingering pause before opening the door for me. Then a touch, accidental at first, but I knew better. I welcomed it, I let it happen, and then I made it happen. I should feel guilty. Maybe any other woman would. But why should I? It wasn't my fault. My husband is the one who let me slip through his fingers. The one who made me doubt myself, the one who made me need this now as I lay in the tangled sheets of another man's bed, my skin still burning from his touch. I wonder if I should stop, if I should turn back before I lose everything. But then I laugh because I know the answer. I'll never stop and he'll never find out. It wasn't the first time I had heard it, but it stung more than it should have. You've put on weight. Isabel, you're not what you used to be. Before this story spirals even further, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications for more. And when the story ends, don't forget to show your support through likes and comments. The words still echoed in my mind, haunting me as I stepped out of the house that afternoon heading for the car. My husband Sebastian had said it in that tone of his, half concerned, half critical, as if he was some sort of expert on my body. The audacity of him, the nerve to point out the few extra pounds I'd gained over the years, as if it wasn't his lack of attention, his distractions that had led me here in the first place. How could he not see the toll his indifference had taken on me? How could he be so blind? I wasn't unattractive, not by any means. In fact, I was still far more appealing than most women half my age. But Sebastian, my husband, didn't look at me the way he once had. His eyes drifted past me, now over me, through me. He took me for granted. He'd stopped seeing me for who I was. The thought of him sitting there on the couch in his lazy disinterest made my blood boil, and as I climbed into the backseat of the car, I felt that familiar anger well up inside me. That's when I saw him. Ezra, the new driver. He was young, fresh, a bit too eager. But there was something about him, something that sparked a little fire inside me. His dark eyes caught mine in the rearview mirror as I settled into the backseat. The glance was brief, but it was enough to send a pulse of heat for me there. It was again Atra Desire Star, and unlike my husband, Ezra saw me. I ran a hand through my hair, letting it fall around my shoulders, the cool air of the car brushing my skin. His eyes flickered, and I could see his attention snap back to the road quickly. I leaned back in the seat, crossing my legs, letting the subtle shift of my body speak for me. "You're new here, aren't you?" I asked casually, my voice smooth and controlled, giving him a chance to respond and to notice me. "Yes, first day," he replied, his voice a bit too stiff, too formal. There was a nervousness there, an innocence that only made him more intriguing. I couldn't help but smile. "You don't need to call me madam," I said, watching his reflection in the mirror. "Just Isabel will do." There was a beat of silence. I could feel him hesitate, his eyes flickering back to the mirror again. But this time he didn't look away so quickly. I caught the tension in his jaw and the subtle shift in his posture. I leaned forward slightly, letting the movement draw his attention, my fingers tracing the edge of the seat. "I'm sure you'll get used to things around here," I continued, my voice lowering just a touch. "The house is full of expectations, but I suppose that's to be expected when you're working for a family like ours, right?" He swallowed hard, and I caught the slight tremble in his hands on a steering wheel. I could feel the air between us shift, thickening with something unspoken. There was a flicker of confusion in his eyes, mixed with something else, something darker. But he still hadn't said anything, hadn't made a move, which only made me want to tease him further. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "You'll find that some things in this house are hard to ignore," I said softly, watching his breath hitch just slightly for a moment. I let the silence stretch. He couldn't hide his discomfort, but he was trying not to look, trying not to notice. And yet I knew he was already trapped. The desire was there. I could feel it in the way. He held the wheel too tightly, the way his eyes occasionally darted to the mirror. Unable to fully break from my gaze, I crossed my arms, leaning back in the seat as though nothing had changed. But everything had. It's been a while since anyone made me feel noticed. I let the words hang in the air, letting the implications settle between us. But I'm sure someone like you knows exactly how to make a woman feel special. Ezra's grip on the steering wheel tightened, but his lips parted slightly as though he wanted to say something, to speak. But the words didn't come. He didn't know what to say, he couldn't, and that was the moment I knew this was going to be fun. It had been a few days since that first ride. I hadn't forgotten Ezra. But I made sure he thought I had. His eyes were still on me, whether he realized it or not. Every time I passed him, I noticed how he stiffened when our gazes met, how he faltered in his movements. When I was near, it was like playing a game of cat and mouse, and I was thoroughly enjoying myself. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, I stepped outside. I knew Ezra would be there, finishing his shift for the day. I had a feeling it was time to push him just a little further, to see how much more control I could take over him. As I walked past the garage, I saw him leaning against the car, his hand resting on the door as he scaled through his phone. His white shirt clung to his toned arms, and the casual slouchy of his posture made him seem approachable, almost too approachable. But I wasn't interested in casual, not anymore. I took a moment to assess him from a distance, noting the way his jaw tightened as he saw me. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I knew it. His body knew me. I wasn't wearing anything too extravagant, just a light dress that hung loosely around my body, but it was enough to make my intentions clear. I made sure to let my SS sway just a little more than usual, as I approached, the sound of my heels clicking on the stone pathway growing louder with each step. "Ezra," I said, breaking the quiet air. His head snapped up immediately, his eyes darting from my face to my body in the same breath. "Miss Isabel," he stammered quickly, standing up straighter. I loved the way my name fell from his lips, trembling. He was trying so hard to keep himself composed, but I could see the crack in his resolve. I continued, stepping closer to him, feeling the heat of his body through the thin fabric of his shirt. "You're always so polite, so formal, it's cute, really." I smiled, tilting my head, "But it's a little unnecessary." He swallowed, clearly uncomfortable, his gaze flicking down to the ground for just a second. "Sorry. I just didn't want to overstep." His voice was strained. I could hear the hint of uncertainty in his voice, and it drove me wild. He was nervous, unsure, but that was what made it so fun. It was about control, about drawing him in piece by piece until he had no choice but to give in. I took another step forward, closing the distance between us. "You're not overstepping, Ezra," I murmured, letting my fingers graze along his arm, just a soft touch. I saw his muscles tense under my touch, his breath hitching. "You're very attractive," I whispered, watching his eyes widen, his pupils diluting just slightly. "But I think you know that already. Don't you?" The tension between us crackled in the air like a live wire. Ezra was fighting the urge to respond, to say something, but he was losing. I could see it. In the way his breath became shallow, and in the way his jaw clenched as though he wanted to keep his composure, but couldn't. I leaned in close enough that he could feel the warmth of my breath against the skin, and I whispered, "You know what I want. Ezra, you know what you want too." His eyes flicked to my lips, and for the briefest moment I thought he might finally give in. But just as quickly as the moment had come, he pulled back, his voice barely audible. "I can't, Miss Isabel. This isn't right." I smiled, the challenge in his words, only igniting my desire to break him further. "You think it's wrong, Ezra? Maybe it's just exactly what you need." I took a step back, letting the silence between us linger thick and heavy. "I'll see you tomorrow." As I turned away, I could feel his eyes burning into my back, watching me go. The taste of the game was on my lips and I couldn't wait to see how far I could push him. It started as a small joke. I was just playing around at first, trying to prove something to Sebastian. Just to show him I could still turn heads. It wasn't about me really. It was about him, about his callous words that made me feel invisible when he said, I wasn't as attractive as I used to be. It stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I took it as a challenge. I started flirting, nothing serious, just a glance here, a smile there to see if I could get a reaction. And when Ezra came into the picture, it was all too easy. He wasn't just a driver, he was different. Every glance he stole at me, every time he seemed to linger a little too long. That asterisk felt different, and in the beginning I told myself I didn't care, but the truth was it felt good. It felt more than good tonight. Sebastian was away on his business trip, leaving the house quiet, empty, and full of possibilities. Ezra had just finished his shift, ready to leave, but I wasn't ready to let him go just yet. I found him in the garage, wiping down the car. His dark shirt clung to his body, his muscles flexing as he worked. There's a kind of unspoken tension between us now, an electric charge that crackled every time we were close. I could see it in the way he looked at me and the way his breath quickened when I was near. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't feel it too. I watched him for a moment, enjoying how his gaze seemed to follow me without him realizing it. Then I approached him slowly, the sound of my heels breaking the silence of the night. Ezra, I said, my voice soft and inviting. He looked up immediately, his eyes widening slightly as he noticed me. Miss Isabel. He said, his voice low, like he was trying to maintain his composure, but it was clear he couldn't keep it together anymore. I was too close now, too much of a temptation. Don't go just yet. I said, my words playful but laced with something deeper. I was hoping you could stick around for a little while longer. He hesitated, his gaze flicking nervously toward the exit. I was about to head home. He muttered, clearly uncertain, but I could tell he was torn. He didn't want to go. Stay, I urged, stepping closer to him, letting my voice dip lower. I have somewhere to be. Later I could use some company. His eyes flicked to the ground for a brief second, then back to me as if trying to make sense of it all. I could see his conflict, the struggle on his face, but I knew he was already caught. Okay, he said. Finally, his voice quiet, but the way his lips pressed together told me everything he wanted. He wasn't leaving. I smiled, watching him closely as he reluctantly stepped aside. He didn't know it yet, but this was where things were going, no turning back now. I led him inside, the door closing softly behind us. The house felt too big, too empty, as if it were waiting for something to happen. I set 3 glasses down on the counter, the clink of the glass filling the silence between us. I'm glad you stayed, I said, turning to face him, my eyes scanning him, taking in the slight shift in his posture, the tension in his body. I think we both know what's going on here. He didn't respond immediately, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't need to say a word. I could feel the heat rising between us, thick and undeniable. I'm not going to pretend, I continued, my voice low, barely a whisper. You're not the only one feeling this pull. You know it, don't you? I stepped closer, close enough that my breath ghost across his skin, his jaw tightened, and I watched his eyes flicker, the uncertainty slipping away. No need to say anything, Sam, I interrupted, cutting him off with a soft laugh. I already know. I leaned in, brushing my lips across his ear. Just enough to send a shiver down his spine. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating, and yet every second of it felt electric. I could feel his presence, his body so close to mine, his breath catching in the air between us. The house felt both too small and too large at the same time, every corner waiting for something to happen, the space between us pulsed a rhythm. I couldn't ignore a quiet promise of what was to come. I had made my move, I had taken control, but now it was his turn. Ezra's gaze was trained on me, his eyes dark, filled with hunger, but something else too, a quiet respect, a wariness, as if he wasn't entirely sure how far to go. But I saw the way. His hands flexed at his sides, the subtle tension in his jaw, his restraint was slipping, and I could feel the exact moment when he finally gave in. I reached out my fingers, brushing against the rough fabric of his shirt. You're still not sure, are you? I asked, my voice low, a teasing note. In my words, after everything, you're still trying to fight this. He swallowed hard, the muscles in his throat working as his gaze flickered down to my lips, then back to my eyes. I don't want to overstep, he said, his voice rough, but there was something else in it, an invitation. I smiled softly, stepping closer to him, making sure he felt the full weight of my presence. I didn't need words anymore. I let the air between us speak louder than anything I could say. Slowly, deliberately. I leaned in my lips, brushing against his ear as I whispered, "You're not overstepping, Ezra. You're exactly where you need to be." It took only a heartbeat before he finally closed the gap. His lips pressed against mine, soft, at first hesitant, like he was testing the waters, but the moment he felt the heat of my mouth on his, the world seemed to fall away. He pulled me closer, his hands on my back, steady but demanding. I could feel the heat of his touch, the strength in his arms as he drew me in, and I responded, my hands sliding up to his C*****T, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath the thin fabric. The kiss deepened, slow and lingering, and I lost myself in it. His lips were soft but urgent, his body pressing against mine as though he couldn't bear the distance anymore, and I couldn't either. It was like a switch had been flipped, the careful control I'd held over everything slipping away. I wanted him. I wanted this. I pulled back just enough to look at him, to let the tension build, to feel the unspoken words hanging in the air. He was breathing hard now, his C*****T rising and falling with every breath. His hand slid lower as if drawn by some unseen force, and I let him, encouraging him with a gentle push. Urging him to take the next step. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" I whispered, my voice breathy, almost taunt, "Waiting for me to make it impossible for you to say no." His fingers tightened around my waist, his eyes dark with desire. He didn't answer, he didn't need to. In that moment, the air between us thickened, the world outside, fading into nothing. There was only us, only the electricity that arced between our bodies and the heat that swelled in every touch, every stolen kiss, every whispered promise. I could feel him losing himself, and in that moment I knew there was no going back. The house was still the same, quiet, empty, but felt different now, as if the walls knew what I'd done, as if they whispered my secrets every time I walked past. Sebastian was still away on his business trip, and I could feel the relief settle over me like a warm, familiar blanket. No one would find out, not now, not ever. The affair had become my truth. It was no longer just an escape, not just a response to Michael's careless words. It was a part of me, a delicious, intoxicating part that I was never going to give up. Ezra was mine now, and the power I had over him was something I relished. I leaned back in the chair, sipping my wine, the glass feeling cool against my fingers. I smiled to myself. I didn't need to feel guilty. Guilt wasn't something that applied to me, not when Sebastian had pushed me to this point. It had started with his offhand remark about my weight, my looks, his blatant admission that I wasn't as desirable as I had once been, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I got, the more it ate at me. But rather than cower, I had done something far better. I had taken control. I had shown him what it meant to underestimate me. And now, I didn't care if he ever found out. He never would, because Sebastian would never know the power I had, how I had turned the tables and made Ezra fall for me in a way he could never have imagined. I had him exactly where I wanted him, and I didn't feel 1 ounce of remorse. The thing about me, I never apologize, not for anything, not for making my own choices, not for doing what feels right for me. Sebastian had pushed me away, whether he meant to or not, and now he would never get to have me back, not the way he once did. I sat there, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows in the room, my fingers drummed absent-minded on the glass, my mind drifting back to Sam's eyes. The way he looked at me, like I was everything he had ever wanted, and I hadn't even had to try that hard. He had fallen into my hands the moment I let him see what he couldn't have. That look in his eyes when I teased him, when I pulled him in just out of reach, was all I needed to know. I had him wrapped around my finger. I couldn't help but smile. I had everything I wanted: the control, the power, the attention. I was the one in charge, and I would continue to be. I didn't need to apologize to Sebastian. He didn't deserve that. He had pushed me into this, into the arms of another man. And now I was going to make sure I kept it that way. He would never know. He would never have the satisfaction of understanding why I had done what I did. I was untouchable. The door clicked open and I stood, my eyes flicking over to the entrance. Ezra was there standing in the doorway, his expression, a mixture of desire and something else, something softer. But it didn't matter. I had already come in. I said, my voice low and commanding, and he obeyed. We didn't need words anymore. As I looked at him, I knew I would never let this go. I would never stop enjoying what I had created. Sebastian would never find out. I would keep him in the dark forever, just as I had always done. This was my life now, this was what I had chosen, and I didn't need to explain it to anyone. I didn't know anyone. An apology, not Sebastian, not Ezra only. Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.